everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. We like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming today and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Flynn. I am hosting today. I'm very excited to welcome back Sophie Elinor. Hello, Sophie.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. It's all sunshine today. Your background's all brighter. I opened a window. It's all happening.
Daylight. So miraculous.
Somehow it makes me feel better. And it's a lovely temperature today. Again, just like yesterday, so we're not sweating. You're wearing a nice jumper. That's cool. I like to see that.
Yep. Thrilled to be wearing a jumper in early Feb.
Thrilled to be wearing
Honestly,
a jumper.
the dream.
Love it. Yeah. That's where we're at in our lives. We had a great stream yesterday. If you did miss it, Sophie was showing us some expressive typography. We had lots of fun, lots of laughs. You can watch that on demand over at YouTube or Behance. If you're watching us live, we are live. So if you have questions as we're rolling along today, please don't hesitate to throw those questions in chat. We love to hear from you. And we're going to jump in. I might let Sophie kind of introduce what we'll get up to today.
Yeah, well, so like you said, yesterday we were more in the Illustrator realm doing some static expressive typography. And today we're going to be jumping into After Effects to do a bit of wiggling and jiggling and such.
Yes.
We are still kind of thematically in the lovey-dovey Valentine's-y kind of area. Mm-hmm. Not because we subscribe to Valentine's Day, but just because it's nice to let people know that you love them. And so I thought for our little After Effects kind of demo today, we might play around with some morphing typography.
Cool.
I might show you a little example. Actually, this is, to start with, this is the phrase that I'm thinking will morph. So love you will morph into miss you.
Oh.
Love you, miss you. It's a phrase that I say almost every day when I hang up the phone from like my parents or my partner or my brother or whoever friend that I'm chatting to at the time. Almost to the point where I have to really think about it when I'm not on the phone to, like if I'm just talking to someone in a professional sense. Like
talking to the bank. Is there anything else I can help you out with today, Miss Elinor? No, that's it. Love you, miss you, thank you, bye.
It's a real, like my brain just starts going down that road and you're like, hang on, what context are we in right now?
That's awesome.
Anyway, that's the sort of phrase, love you, miss you, is what we're going to be doing.
Love it. And
the style of that sort of lettering is kind of similar to this little animation I did a while ago. Cool. It's a little bit sort of goopy. It's got a certain kind of like plasticity to it, I suppose.
Yeah.
We'll dive into that once we sort of bring our file into After Effects. But this is the general sort of effect that we're going to be going for with that.
Cool.
So just jumping back into Illustrator, just so I can show you quickly how I've set the file up. Similar to the sort of process we did yesterday with the hand lettering, I did start with a font here, but it wasn't quite the format or the dimensions that I needed for this. So I kind of wanted a square format. Mm-hmm. So I've stretched the letters out and sort of reshaped a few of them, where a lot of these sort of serifs were kind of tapered. I've just flattened them all out just to give it a bit more of a crisp kind of a feel. However, we are going to play around with that, like soften it and add a bit more texture when we get into After Effects.
Yeah. Cool.
So maybe we will do that now. Oh, the other thing is I've just got each letter here on its own separate layer, just to make life easier when we do start animating.
Cool. So just before we do that, so why is it that you can create letters in After Effects? So why is it that you will create the letters in Illustrator and then import them in?
Yeah, I just find it a lot easier to play around with different layouts when I'm in Illustrator. You definitely can do it in After Effects, but I like to see this progression and I like to play around with, just different options, different letter forms, and I find I can just do it a lot faster when I can see multiple versions at once and kind of pick and choose what's working best.
Cool.
It's also just like a lot quicker to play around with color combos too. But that's maybe just because Illustrator was kind of my first sort of bit of software.
Right. So you're really comfortable in Illustrator.
Yeah. When I was a little baby graphic designer, this was kind of my first foray into the software sort of side of things. But yeah, if you're kind of more of an After Effects type of person, you totally can just do it within the software.
Cool.
So we're just going to import our file in here. That is it. Whoops. Oh, why are we getting... Oh, that's why. Over here.
The multiple screens. Yeah.
Gets me every time. The one pop-up window over here, I'm like, why is this not working?
Yeah.
Let's try that again. Okay, we want this guy. We want composition and retain layers and just create composition. And that, when we double click on that, is going to open up all of our layers from Illustrator into separate layers within our timeline here.
Cool. So that separating layers in Illustrator, I feel like, is a really important step, especially if you're not familiar with After Effects. Like, do that, make life easy for yourself, and it'll just come in already separated on the timeline. Perfect. Yeah,
that's kind of another benefit, I suppose, of starting in Illustrator too. You can just sort of start with everything on one canvas and then split the layers out that you need instead of trying to figure out every single different layer in advance.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I'm going to do before I do anything else is convert all of those Illustrator layers into vectors. And once we've done that, we can just kind of get rid of all of our Illustrator layers because we do not need them anymore. It's looking like a bit of a mess, but that's... I feel like that's a phrase I say almost every 15 minutes when we're doing these streams.
It's like
please trust me.
First 50 minutes, yeah, and then it's like, okay, get together. Phew. My goodness.
It's a real cliffhanger. So we've got, if I switch off this MISS layer, it's making a little bit more sense in terms of our overall composition. But generally, what we want to do here is we want this M to kind of morph into the L, and the O will go into the I, the V into the S, and the E into the second S. So each letter in love will morph into its corresponding kind of counterpart in miss. Did I say that right? That makes sense?
Makes sense to me.
So with that in mind, I might just reorder these layers a little bit so that our little pairs are kind of sitting together. And let's just bring this composition down a little bit. And if we just look at this L and M combination first to begin with, the first thing that I'm going to do is basically just create like a really simple fade between the two letters. And I'm going to do that just by playing with the with the opacity property here. So we're looking at our L layer to begin with. So we want to start with the word love and have that morph into miss. So we want our L to be at full opacity to begin with. And then we want it to kind of fade out. And if we look at our M, we kind of want the reverse to happen. So we want to start at 0 and drop a little keyframe there and skip to the same point in the timeline and just bring that up. So really basic kind of crossfade that we're doing here.
Cool.
It does not look like much just yet, but we're going to add some bells and whistles and dress this up a little to get that.
Of switching from one to the other.
Yeah. So we want these to be directly over the top because we kind of want this sort of like the morphing to happen at the same time. I'm just going to switch off our background layer for a moment so we can really have a look. And I might even just switch off the rest of these layers so we can really focus on what's happening here. the way that we're going to, if we jump back and have a look at our little reference animation here, you can see there's this almost sort of blurring that happens as it does this morph.
Right.
And the way we're going to do that is this really nifty little combo. We'll add an adjustment layer on top of this, on top of our whole composition. And we're going to add a blur. Man, does your After Effects ever do this where you're like, I know that's an effect in there, but it's just going to take a minute to find it?
Yeah. I get that with all sorts of software.
It just needs to have a little think, you know? All right, here we go.
There it is. It's because it's loading so much stuff.
So there's too many blurs. I've got to search the entire back catalog for you. So we just want a Gaussian blur that we're going to add here. And we're going to bump this up to, I don't know, let's really go hard on this. We want to blur this right the way out. Let's maybe go like 50 or something. Super blurry. By default, it will have this little repeat edge pixels option ticked, which is why we're getting this kind of clipping on the edge of that layer. If we just switch that off, it's going to let it soften kind of out into the background there.
I wonder why that's there.
Yeah, don't know. But that is the solution.
Turn it off.
I do not know why it is a problem, but that's our solution.
Nice.
So what that is doing is it's really just feathering the heck out of our outlines. But to kind of clip that back in, we're going to add to our adjustment layer a levels effect. And we can switch the channel to alpha. And what that's going to do is kind of ignore the color values and just look at the transparency values within this layer. Mm-hmm. And because we've applied that blur, we've now got all these different sort of degrees of transparency within the layer. Before we just had crisp vectors, then we applied the blur and we've got all this feathering. And now the levels, if we pull in these little values, it's going to crisp that outline back up again.
That's cool.
And so now when we do our little morph,
oh wow,
yeah,
that's
we
awesome.
get this really interesting, almost lava lampy kind of transition that happens.
Wow, I was not expecting it just to work like that.
Yeah, it's magic. It's so magic.
I do love After Effects with that. Like, it's a classic case of let the machine do it for you. Like, that whole, you know, it looks really, really complicated. But if you know the things to do, like what you just did then, and this crazy effect.
Before I kind of learnt about this, like, beautiful little combo of techniques, I would have probably tried to like morph an L into an M by maybe just using the path property,
right?
Physically moving anchor points around until it kind of went into the correct shape.
Yep.
And if you've got two letters that are kind of similar shapes and sizes, that can work really well. And it can be like a super elegant kind of transition. But we're going from an L into an M, and there's very little sort of DNA that's shared between these two characters. One's really wide and heavy at the top, and one's got this, you know, the weight distribution is completely in the opposite area with this. But this is just a really nice, way of working around that kind of transition.
Yeah.
We can tighten this little histogram arrows. We're basically just taking all of the values that were low opacity and the values that were really opaque and smushing them together, and that's why we're going from the sort of blur to the crisp edge.
Yeah.
So that the tighter you bring those in, the crisper your outline will be. But we might get a little bit more fancy with this and play around with, we might just keyframe some of this sort of blurriness that's happening, because it is, we are losing quite a lot of our corners from what we began with. So I might just drop that keyframe for the blurriness in the middle of these two ones here, and maybe we can soften it back down on the outside, maybe to, I don't know, around 20 or something could be a good amount. So that's looking a little bit less cropped in to me. And if we just increase the blurriness while the transition is happening, and then sort of copy this starting keyframe back over here, our start and end, we get this really nice easing off as it kind of fills back out into the corners.
Right. Yep. That's great.
I don't know, if I zoom in a little bit more, you might be able to see that a little bit better. So you can kind of see it's curving in, we get the morphing, and then it just sort of fills out a bit at the end.
Yep. That's great.
And we might just ease those keyframes a little, because it just feels kind of like sacrilege not to add a bit of ease. And so now that we have that, we can basically duplicate these keyframes across the rest of our composition.
Yeah.
So if we take our starting L, where we begin at 100% opacity and go down to 0, take these two keyframes. To start with, I'm just going to have all our action in sync, and then we'll play around with the timing of things. So let's switch these layers back on. And we want the O, the V, and the E. And I'm just going to Command V, and you can see that my keyframes have pasted there. And then I'm going to copy the M keyframes and paste them on the I, S, S, and paste those there. So now we have this really lava lampy kind of...
Very groovy.
Yeah. It's a bit sexy, isn't it?
It is.
The way that it does that. There's something very pleasing about that motion.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, would have thought it'd be far more complicated to do something like that. Like, I thought we'd be having almost plugins or having some sort of very fancy, I had to use something that was specifically like lava lamp type or something like that someone has coded.
The lava lamp filter on, and then
the
you're good to go.
Yeah.
It's a super versatile kind of effect too when you use the blur and the levels on an adjustment layer in combo. Makes for some beautiful transitions, but it also just makes for some, like, if you leave it kind of keyframed at full blurriness kind of thing, you'll notice when you kind of move. Oh, sorry, there's a real frog in my throat today.
Yeah. Oh, they're having a little
smooch.
A little smooch, yeah.
It really changes. It feels like it changes the physics or something of the composition, because it's got that underlying blur. So whenever like two objects kind of come within close orbit of each other, they sort of they kind of pull into each other and get this really interesting goopy sort of effect. So even if you weren't doing the transition, if you just had that adjustment layer over the top of some sort of artwork or composition, even just moving these objects around would create some really interesting effects.
Yeah. Cool.
I've played around with this a fair bit previously, just because
why not?
Once I find a trick, I'm like, how can I use this in 1,000 different ways?
Yeah, that's cool. Looks like it's got these little things running through it. It's almost like something underneath your skin.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me feel very uncomfortable.
That's why I said it. Mission accomplished.
Ugh, it's giving me the heebie-jeebies now. It
Every
was
time
relaxing.
you look at it, you're like, I really like this, until I showed Flynn and he ruined it for me forever.
But yeah, so with this particular composition, it's that same sort of combo of filters over, like within an adjustment layer over a composition, just over the top.
Yeah.
And just adding in a little bit of movement gives you those really tasty, sort of smoochy little moments when objects come near each other.
Yeah. Really cool.
Did this one a few years ago.
It's like water, reflection of water.
Yeah.
Is that one okay? I haven't ruined that one forever.
No, I'm fine with water. Water is a very
cool.
tranquil. Yeah, no, that's totally fine. But crawling under my skin, not so much.
Okay, gotcha.
If we can draw a line between those two. Yeah.
We're getting close.
You can also use it for multicolor kind of compositions as well. This has like a really nice. It's not just the shapes themselves, but it's also the colors that kind of end up melding together in a really sort of unexpected kind of way. Yeah. But yeah, so there's lots of fun to be had with this combination of effects.
Try it out at home. There you go.
Cool. Now we've got sort of the hero animation happening, which is that sexy little morph that's going on there, but it is all happening at once, and it's quite a quick transition. So I feel like to kind of give each letter its moment in the spotlight, we just might offset these keyframes a little bit to just give them a little moment to themselves. So we shall leave L and M where it is, because that's our starting point. And I'm just going to go and collect all of the other keyframes from the rest of these letters.
Right.
And just kind of nudge them. Ooh, not that far. Maybe just 2 frames to start with, and we'll see how that looks. Yeah, that's already looking better.
This staggering of animations, I think I recall in a previous stream we've discussed it in a bit more detail, but like when I think you said something along the lines of when you're sort of starting out, you kind of had everything somewhat mathematically, like, okay, within half a second this one comes in, therefore within a second the next animation should come in. And what you found from that process was that it felt uniform, like it didn't feel organic because it was too kind of perfect. And it's come in handy a bunch of times. I've been trying to just animate something simple. I'm like, oh, remember Soph said, it's better just to kind of feel it out and don't try to do it too mamathematically. Try to, stagger it, try it, that kind of thing. Is that accurate?
Yeah. No, how wise I was to say that back whenever I said that.
Who said that? You did. Oh my gosh.
Genius.
What a genius I was.
It just gives you a moment to kind of take in what's happening, because it is quite a lot all at once.
Yeah.
And like you were just sort of saying, you can have everything, all firing all at the same time, but you just sort of lose the effect of everything instead of just giving, like, each little letter should have its own tiny little solo, and then you can appreciate the composition as a whole sort of thing. Yeah. So that to me feels way more interesting, just having that. It's still quite quick. It's only a couple frames difference, but just having that kind of progression and leading your eye across the page makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we can probably do here, just to kind of, I suppose, dress the set a little more, is maybe bring in a bit more movement to these letters. And I'm thinking maybe we could just have them rotate a little as they lead into the morphing transition, just to build, I guess, just to go back to your sort of animation principles, to build a bit of anticipation before the main sort of morph happens, and then a little bit of kind of follow through at the end. So we could just do a bit of this sort of rotation, but to me it feels a bit, I don't love that it's rotating from the center. I like to feel like these letters are sitting on some kind of like ground baseline kind of thing.
Right.
So I'm just going to use my little anchor point tool here and just kind of bring their center of gravity down to their feet. And so now when we rotate, we're kind of pivoting from that spot instead. And that feels a bit more like it's, you know, standing on the ground instead of just pinned to a wall kind of thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just go and do that for each of the letters. Unfortunately, this is one of those things you have to do letter by letter. As far as I know, if someone has a cheeky way of applying this across a whole composition, I would be all ears.
Have you done that before? Has there been something that you've done for years or a certain amount of time, and then one day you sort of Googled it or something, or you've looked at a tutorial to see, is there a better way to do this, and you discover that there is?
Yeah.
Right.
Big time. Many times, all the time.
Many times.
Even just the simple sort of thing of like hiding keyframes within layers.
Okay.
So for example, we have applied keyframes to the opacity property within this M layer. And if I close that back up, when you open it, you kind of have to sort of twirl down into the transform property to get to the opacity property within it. And it's a lot of like clicking into different layers until you can find where you've actually put the keyframes.
Yes.
But if I just close that up and hit U on the keyboard, it's just going to bring up exactly the keyframes.
So it brings up just the keyframes that you've changed. Is that right?
Yeah, anything you've applied a keyframe to, whatever keyframe is within that layer, it will bring that up and nothing else.
Oh, that's awesome. So if you're tweaking something back and forth lots of different layers. Okay.
Yeah. That was like, I think one of those things where when you're self-taught, you kind of gloss over the basics sometimes and you do something the most roundabout possible way until you see someone like do it in 2 clicks and you're like, I've wasted months of my life twirling into these little drop down menus.
It's like story of my life on Adobe Live. Someone will sort of show something, some shortcut, and I'm like, how long has that existed? Is that new? And they're like, it's been around for a decade. Oh no.
Since the dawn of the software.
Yeah,
no big deal.
Exactly. It came out in the vanilla packaging. Yeah. It happens more often than I care to admit.
So we're going to play around with this rotation property a little bit. I'm going to, actually maybe we'll do it over here because we need to, our L disappears over here. So let's do it at the front of the timeline. Maybe 10. Essentially what I want to happen is for each letter to kind of fall back a little in anticipation before kind of doing a bit of this. So actually, critical thing I forgot to do here is to drop a keyframe at 0. So I might just move all of these down a bit so we've got some room to move here. So we're going to fall back and then shoot forward. And this is kind of nice too, because we get a little bit of that sort of smoochy action happening where it just lightly kisses the edge of the O. Just a little peck on the cheek.
Gentle one, yeah.
And we're going to add a little bit of that follow through, just kind of ping-ponging either side of 0 in decreasing amounts until we kind of get back to 0. And I'm just sort of picking these values at random a little bit to begin with. That's all happening a bit too quickly. So let's give ourselves a bit more space here. Move this along. You really want to exaggerate this kind of fall back. That can take a bit of time.
Yeah.
And we can spread these keyframes out a little bit more. I'm just sort of eyeballing this to begin with, and I can kind of tweak once we've got things sitting roughly in the right position. This needs to happen a bit quicker here, I think.
And you said you're mostly self-taught with this sort of thing. What's the hardest part of kind of picking up a new piece of software or After Effects specifically, and kind of
just
learning?
starting. Yeah, really, that was the biggest kind of barrier for me, is just kind of opening up this whole new interface and not knowing where anything is, because it's quite different to the rest of the sort of, you know, Photoshop, Illustrator kind of interface.
Yeah.
But I think as soon as you've got one little trick up your sleeve, it all becomes a bit less scary. And, you know, I feel like I don't actually have that many tricks up my sleeve, but I can do a lot of different things with them.
Right.
And I think that's kind of an interesting, you know, sometimes when you have a restricted palette, you can be really creative if you're only playing with one particular tool and just sort of approaching it from a bunch of different angles.
That's true.
That can be quite motivating and quite creative as well.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I get that.
Boing. Okay. Boing. Boing. So let me take that ease off and let's look at how stiff and kind of awkward that feels. And then as soon as we right click and just add some easy ease, it just feels so much smoother and more fluid and much more comfortable. And a critical part of the process is watching the same 2 seconds of animation you did 1,000 times in a row, just to check,
right?
Just to check if on the 49th viewing it does still look all right. Now we've got that. Where do we want that to happen? I want for the shift, the morph to happen just as it kind of hits the other side. So we want that anticipation falling back, and I want the morph to happen when it kind of hits the other side.
Yeah.
So if we look at our keyframes together, boop, and then as it kind of hits there, that's when it's going to go.
Just morphs into it. That's so cool. Hey, this quick question from chat. Would you be able to make the L bend in response to the jiggle as well? L bend. Or does that mean like kind of instead of like that, it's like almost like a tree swaying?
Oh, like it's made of rubber instead of timber or something.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I'm getting. That's what I'm picking up.
Yeah, you definitely can. What's the best way to do that? You could use the puppet pin tool, which is essentially where you're sort of sticking pins in an object, and it sort of places a bit of a mesh grid over the top of it, and you can move those points and it'll sort of twist things around. That's one way you could do that. I feel like there is another really interesting effect. It's called CC Bend It. That's something that I picked up from Manon Loire, who's an incredible French animator and illustrator.
Who was that? That was said too quick. I didn't pick up.
Manon Loire.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think she did Adobe Max last year.
She did. Actually, I found her for Adobe Max. So.
Hey.
Yeah. But you said the name correctly, but I was probably reading it incorrectly for like 6 months.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Flynn.
Yes, that's me.
Yeah, so the CC Bend It tool, I mean, let's just chuck it on this layer so we can have a look at how it works. I think we've got to sort of place our I haven't used this for a little while, so please forgive me if I... Whoa, okay, so where is our center point? Okay, that's way down here. We need this to be up here. And I think, so we've got our sort of, we've kind of, similar to the puppet tool, we've kind of given 2 points of reference at the top and the bottom. And then you can kind of just sort of do a bit of boop,
Oh yeah.
boop.
Look at that. That's cool. How good's that?
So you could totally layer that onto this as part of that. I hadn't planned for that, so I'm just going to delete that.
Yeah, but that's cool. Thank you
But
for
it is
showing us.
possible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And she uses that a lot for animating like strands of hair or leaves kind of blowing in a breeze, just things that have a really gentle sort of a sway. You can kind of go really hard with it and have some, you know, extreme bending, but she uses it in, she has a really light touch with it and uses it in a very subtle but effective way with her illustrations.
Nice.
Yeah. So now that we've got that sort of rotation run of keyframes there, I'm going to copy, and because our L and our M are happening at the same time, those keyframes can go in exactly the same spot.
Cool.
And now when it morphs, the M's going to have this, you know, it's going to have the same sort of motion that the L had. If I take that off again, let's just have another look at that. So the L morphs, but the M's really static, and it kind of takes you out of that transition. But when we pop that back in, copy, paste, now has a much more sort of cohesive feel to it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And I think for the rest of our letters, because we had just kind of offset this opacity to 2 keyframes per like pair of letters, I'm going to do the same for our rotation. So we can just jump forward 2 frames and then highlight our O and our I layers and paste those there. I hope this is making sense as I'm going along.
Yep, I'm with you. I really love that you kind of try to get it right for the first one, and then you kind of, you know, then just copy and paste it across all the others, and it just does so much work.
Yeah. So now it's got a really, there's a lot more energy in it, and it feels, I don't know, just more pleasing. I can't think of a better word than just pleasing to see it kind of have that anticipation to sort of lead into this interesting morph that's happening, and then that little bit of kind of settling back into final position.
Yeah.
And even though we're not really doing much with you at the bottom here, I think we can probably bring those rotation keyframes to the party downstairs, just so that it feels like part of the same composition.
Yeah.
And we're still going to let L be the first bit of movement, but I might just in between there paste those rotation keyframes so they're kind of happening at the same time, but still offsetting them like 2 frames from each other.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same.
Yeah. And then even though we haven't really animated anything, because we've got that blur and levels combination happening, there is still this interesting, like sticky sort of morphing that's happening with the letters at the bottom, which is kind of cool to check out. Zoom out a little. Woo! Very satisfying.
That's awesome.
I feel very satisfied. And then if we want to kind of make this loop, we can just sort of duplicate and reverse our almost like a boomerang kind of thing.
Because it's kind of like a cardinal sin now not to have a loop and animation.
I know, isn't it?
Doesn't loop because of
in loop we trust.
Medias, flamed on TikTok or whatever. But even on websites, right? Like you open up a website, like if you looked at Matt Loat or Matt Voice or yours or something like that, like it's going to be, generally there's a grid and it's
Yeah.
and it's a looping animation within about 6 to 10 seconds or something.
Yep. That is the rule that we all must follow.
Well, it's just
the
if
commandment
it
we must obey.
but if it doesn't loop, it's kind of like graphic design principles and illustration principles and things like those rules are there. If you see something that doesn't kind of quite do that, you think, oh, it must be a mistake. Like
yeah, or they ran out of time.
Yeah, they ran out of time. It's not completed,
yeah.
but it's wrong. Like, you know.
Unless it's some kind of short film where there's a start, a middle,
Totally.
and an end. Then sure.
Yeah.
And like credits in the middle to break it up before you go back to the start.
Sure.
But yeah, it does feel like a missed opportunity to not make a loop, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to switch the background back on here and just show you why I switched it off in the first place. Because our adjustment layer is sitting at the top of our timeline, it's affecting every single layer that's underneath it. And it's when we do that, we lose all of our kind of clarity and morphing effect because it's now picking up the background as a flat color.
Right. Okay.
And we don't have any transparency anymore. Like it's reading this sort of composition as this is all 100% opaque.
Right.
Whereas when we switch that off and there's nothing in the background, if I switch our little levels effect off, we've got all those like varying degrees of opacity. So the way around that is just a really simple pre-comp. So we just highlight everything except the background layer, make a pre-comp. It's opened up on the wrong window again. Bring it over here. And now when we switch, oh, hang on, what's going on there?
We're live, ladies and gentlemen. It's great. Unexpected
Abracadabra, is this the card you chose?
That's an apple, so.
Why are we getting that? What's happened there? Oh, that's why, because I switched when I was just demoing it, I switched our levels thing off. Silly. Silly Billy. Okay, there we go. Now
did that just change it in the comp when you went back out? You didn't have to make a new comp for that action?
No.
Okay.
So that, this little Love You pre-comp, I just opened that up separately, just kind of like a grouped layer.
Right.
And yeah, because I had switched off, played myself, because I switched off the levels effect here, it kind of undid everything that we just built together.
Right.
But it's fine. It's still there. It's all good. Now, because we had to kind of crunch in so tightly with that levels effect, I don't know if you can see it. Maybe if I zoom in a bit more, we're kind of getting a little bit of this sort of crunchy, like aliasing on the edges of our letters. And it's really only noticeable if you zoom in 1,000,000%, but it is a little bit distracting and kind of taking away from the smoothness of the whole thing. So this is where we can bring in a bit of texture just to sit on top of this to just kind of soften that and take away from that jagged edge. So I'm going to add we want another adjustment layer, and we want turbulent displace. This is actually, that's not what we're going for. And perfect. This is another really useful little trick that I picked up from Manon Loire. She uses this, again, just a really light touch to add a bit more of a handmade feel to your very crisp vectors. So let's zoom in a little so we can see what's happening here. And the amount currently is set to 50, which is way too much. So we'll bring that down, and the size can come right down to, and we can bring the complexity up a little bit. And at this stage, this is kind of where I spend a bit of time just playing around with these values a little bit. It depends on the size of your composition as to how much, what the amount and the size and the complexity required is. And also just, what kind of flavor you're going for. If you want it to have a really obvious texture, or if you're just going for something that's going to soften things a little bit.
Where do you normally sit in that spectrum, on that spectrum?
Yeah, I try to go for a more subtle appearance.
Right.
I don't want it to feel like we were talking about yesterday. I don't want it to feel really obviously out of the box, kind of, straight off the shelf texture. I want it to, I want it to feel like it's just sort of happening in the background, and you only really notice it if you're looking closely.
Yeah.
Just like a little bit of extra, like a little dusting of powdered sugar on top, kind of thing.
Right. It's just a garnish.
Yeah. So if we turn that, I don't even know, I might need to zoom in a bit further for you to see, because it's really subtle at the moment. That's with the effect switched on, and that's with it off. So it's just, maybe we'll bump it up a bit because it is very subtle. Might make it a teensy bit bigger, and maybe we'll bump that up a bit too. That's feeling a little bit better. So yeah, if we switch that off, you can kind of see it's just got a little bit more bumpiness to it.
Yeah.
Not a huge amount, but it's just a little bit of something. And we could leave it at that. We could just have it be that sort of, static roughness. But we can also make use of this random seed property here. If I hold Option while I click on the little stopwatch icon, it's going to open up this little scripts panel here.
Right.
And I really don't know much about scripts, but I do know, if you type time *12, what that's going to tell it is to pick a random value, like every 12 frames, kind of like 12 times 12 frames a second, sorry, gosh.
Right. 12
really
frames every second.
Yes,
Got
thank you.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the timing you would use if you were doing a stop motion, for example, or like a frame by frame animation. That's like 12 frames per second is a format that I work in quite a lot for that. Right. So it pulls it in that more handmade direction, just by the fact that instead of having this very smooth movement throughout, it's now got almost like posterized time would do a similar sort of thing. It's so if we play that back now, you can just see that it's got a slight bit of a jiggle to it.
Yeah, definitely.
And now we just stare lovingly at our new beautiful baby animation
for the next 5 minutes, everyone,
and just make sure that it's okay. We can jump back in here actually and start working on making that whole thing loop.
Yep.
Is probably a good thing to do.
We are in our last 5 minutes, by the way, as well, so that's perfect timing.
I reckon we can do it.
Alessandra's saying, I can see here now how you and Kat worked out great for that Bluey project.
Yeah. Very mutual lovers of color and motion and
craft and stuff.
Yes.
Very cool.
Where
do you go from Bluey? Like
it's all downhill.
It's all downhill, right? Like it's pretty career high. I think that's pretty cool.
Good to peak early, you know.
Yeah. End up this jaded animator, like illustrator. I used to work with Bluey, you know.
Back in my day. So we've got our little morph happening here. Again, we'll just do our little nudging 2 keyframes along just to give us that nice little offset moment.
Yeah.
And I think we should be able to just do a straight copy of this because we want that same rotation motion to happen, I think. Oop, applied that to the wrong layer. It's always helpful. There we go. Okay. So again, just sort of jumping forward in little 2 keyframe increments to get that little offset happening. Woo! Ooh, interesting.
It's doing something.
Yeah, that's a bit funky. So I think the O is kind of picking up on the edge of the M there. Yeah, interesting. That might be something to play with a little bit more.
I could see that. I could see the gears turning in your head. You're like, if I wasn't live,
Yeah.
I'd just be like, what's occurring here and how do we use
it? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. You could kind of go with it or you could fight against it. You know, it's kind of an interesting little artifact that's happened. Whether we want it to be quite so abstract is, you know, that's just sort of something to play with, I suppose. If we jump back out and look at our full composition, we should hopefully have a little bit of a loop happening. Oh, where are we ending here? Okay, all right, here we go. Moment of truth. There's definitely something, right? Like there's a really kind of unexpected, interesting little morph that's happening there.
That's awesome.
I think maybe one solution, if we didn't want this O to kind of clip into the L, I don't know if this is going to work because this is a bit of an experiment, but if we take our...
You've got 2 minutes.
All right, perfect. That's all I need. Let me on the field, coach. I can do it. If we take our O and I layers and maybe just try and... This might throw out some other things. And I'm going to take a copy of that adjustment layer and just sit it on top of here. I don't know how this is going to go. That might do absolutely nothing. Ooh, okay. So that's pulled it apart. It's not hitting the M anymore because I've separated it out from its own, like onto its own layer. But I think I maybe preferred it because it's giving us this funny little, like that's happening quite quickly, whereas before it morphed a little more. So maybe let's just undo that and let it be how it is.
Speaking of letting it be, we've only got a minute left. So we're going to have to leave it there. That's awesome. We got so much done. Yeah, really quick. And very impressed that it's just such a simple process to get that morph happening. And then it's getting the, you know, that basic animation principle of the anticipation and then, you know, the reaction. Don't know the exact word, but
the follow through?
Follow through?
Yeah.
And then just, again, something I always love about After Effects, just kind of apply that to like all the other layers, and it's lots of tweaking and practicing and watching it over and over and over and over again.
I need to clear the rest of my afternoon to continue watching.
I can tell that you're just going to leave After Effects open and you're going to be straight back in there playing around.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it, everybody. That's us. Thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us for these last 2 live streams.
It's always a pleasure. I have such a fun time doing it.
Awesome. Me too. Have a great time. We're actually back. We're doing 3 live streams this week. We have a live stream tomorrow with Joy Chang, focusing on Lunar New Year. So that'll be lots of fun. And we'll be in Photoshop playing around with Firefly, Gen AI, that kind of stuff. So please join us for that same time tomorrow. Sophie, we will see you in the next Adobe Live.
Love you. Miss you.
Love you. Miss you. Mwah.
Mwah.